Welcome back to NASCAR World News. For 3 full years, drivers have been quietly whispering among themselves that something is fundamentally broken with the next-gen car. This past weekend at Talladega, half the entire field got eliminated in a single massive wreck, and suddenly, nobody is staying quiet about anything anymore. Even more shocking than the crash itself, Kyle Busch just revealed to the entire world that NASCAR physically walked into his race shop following his last victory and told him directly to stop doing what his team had been doing to find speed. So, are the drivers telling the complete truth here, or is something considerably bigger and more troubling happening beneath the surface of this sport? Let us begin with Kyle Busch, because what he revealed this past week is genuinely stunning information. Busch sat down with Sean Hannity for an extended podcast conversation. Approximately 1 hour into the discussion, the topic shifted to his most recent Cup Series victory, which occurred all the way back in June of 2023 at Gateway Motorsports Park. That win represented Busch's 3rd victory of that season, his debut campaign driving for Richard Childress Racing. He had launched that year with a genuinely hot start, collecting 3 wins across his first 15 races, and then everything stopped completely. He has not won since that Gateway afternoon. Busch finally offered the public an explanation for why. After the 3rd race we won at Gateway, we got our hands smacked for some of the stuff that we were doing to the race car that NASCAR didn't like and said don't bring that back, Busch told Hannity directly. He clarified that nothing his team had been doing violated any existing written rule. The organization had simply discovered a clever exploitation of a gray area, precisely the kind of competitive edge that every team across the entire garage is perpetually hunting for and attempting to find. Busch described it as cheating without actually cheating. He explained the concept as finding additional downforce, reducing weight, getting the car riding lower to the ground, and ultimately carrying more speed through corners. Every single team in the garage pursues exactly these kinds of advantages constantly. But following Gateway, NASCAR delivered their message and told RCR to stop. Busch says they complied completely, and the victories stopped arriving simultaneously. Consider the full weight of what that statement actually means. A future first-ballot Hall of Fame driver is publicly stating that NASCAR intervened following 3 consecutive wins and shut down a practice that violated absolutely no written regulation. He has gone from owning the longest active winning streak in the entire sport, spanning 19 consecutive seasons, to sitting in the middle of a 102-race losing streak that shows no signs of ending. He missed the playoffs completely in 2024. He missed them again in 2025. He is 40 years old, watching organizations like Joe Gibbs Racing, Team Penske, and Hendrick Motorsports continue unlocking the same car while his program falls progressively further behind with each passing month. Busch openly acknowledges how deeply and personally the situation affects him. He described himself as always being the kind of driver who genuinely believed he could make a meaningful difference in any car on any given weekend. Now he says that any time he pushes this new generation car beyond its established limit, he ends up spinning it off the track. That admission from a driver of his caliber carries an enormous amount of weight and significance. And here is precisely where the situation becomes even more layered and genuinely uncomfortable for NASCAR as an organization. Right now in 2026, Tyler Reddick has won 5 of the first 9 races of the season. That pace matches prime Dale Earnhardt-level dominance from the 1987 season. Fans are already asking pointed and increasingly loud questions about the consistency of how NASCAR applies its oversight and intervention across different teams and organizations. Busch's detailed public account makes those questions considerably louder and more difficult to dismiss or ignore. Now shift attention to NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell, who has since made the overall situation even more revealing and significant through his own public statements. O'Donnell appeared on the Door Bumper Clear podcast several weeks ago. When the conversation turned to widespread fan frustration with the next-gen car, he did not attempt to deflect or minimize the concerns being raised. He stated directly that he genuinely agrees with the fans regarding the areas where meaningful improvements can and should be made. That is an enormous admission by any measure. NASCAR as an organization almost never publicly acknowledges that their premier race car carries fundamental problems requiring correction. O'Donnell explained the original reasoning behind building the car in the first place. Team operating costs had spiraled completely out of control across the garage. The next-gen car was specifically engineered to make competition more financially sustainable and accessible. New ownership groups arrived. Previously uncompetitive organizations began winning races. But O'Donnell openly acknowledged that the car has developed identifiable and persistent problems, specifically at intermediate tracks and superspeedway configurations. He indicated that minor adjustments had been attempted heading into Talladega, with more substantial changes planned for January off-season testing. He stated plainly that NASCAR does not like the current situation either, and is actively working toward solutions. And just days following those candid public admissions, O'Donnell received a promotion to the position of NASCAR CEO. He becomes the first individual outside the France family bloodline to hold that specific title since Bill France himself founded the entire sport back in 1948. So the person now occupying the top position in the entire organization has already gone on record publicly agreeing that the car requires meaningful work. That context matters enormously for understanding everything that follows. But the real test arrived at Talladega this past Sunday, and by virtually every honest measure, it was a complete and total disaster. NASCAR had attempted to engineer a solution by restructuring the stage lengths for the event. The opening stage stretched to 98 laps. The final two stages were shortened to 45 laps each, with the specific intention of eliminating the need for fuel conservation strategy during the critical closing laps of the race. The underlying idea was straightforward and logical. Force drivers to race aggressively at the end rather than circling the track in formation to protect fuel mileage. Stage 1 unfolded exactly as the most pessimistic observers had feared. Completely processional and lacking any genuine racing action. Drivers ran at partial throttle, executing a carefully choreographed parade lap exercise to preserve fuel resources. Then Stage 2 arrived, drivers finally committed to full throttle racing, and on lap 115 the entire afternoon collapsed into chaos. Bubba Wallace was leading the field. Ross Chastain pushed him from the rear. Wallace's car got turned sideways under the contact, slammed directly into Cole Custer, and the entire pack behind them had nowhere to escape. When the smoke finally cleared and officials surveyed the damage, 26 of the 40 cars that had started the race were officially listed as involved in the incident. Only 4 cars at the very front of the field escaped the carnage completely unaffected. Officials threw the red flag and stopped competition entirely for nearly 10 full minutes while the cleanup crews worked to clear the debris. The list of casualties was devastating. Kyle Larson, Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, Ty Gibbs, Bubba Wallace, and a lengthy additional roster of names were all done for the afternoon before the race had reached its conclusion. The drivers who emerged from that wreckage were absolutely furious, and they were not interested in choosing careful diplomatic language when the cameras found them. Joey Logano, a former champion and 3-time Talladega winner, delivered the most quotable summary of the entire situation during the Fox Sports broadcast. He essentially asked what exactly NASCAR wants from competitors at this track: save fuel and look boring, or race hard and crash everything in sight. He framed it as a forced binary choice with no acceptable middle ground available. When he addressed the media after the race, his assessment grew considerably sharper and more detailed. He stated that the current car has demonstrated repeatedly that drivers simply cannot race each other at superspeedways without generating massive crashes. He calculated that the field managed approximately 10 to 12 laps of actual genuine racing before the wreck eliminated half the field. He attributed the core mechanical problem to the round bumpers that characterize the current car. When two cars make contact, the bumpers do not push each other straight ahead like flat surfaces would. They deflect at angles like two basketballs being pushed together at speed. One contact and a driver spins. It is essentially unavoidable physics given the current equipment. Ryan Blaney, the defending series champion and most recent Talladega winner, found his own car destroyed in the incident and offered an equally blunt assessment of what the current situation represents. He described the track experience as a binary choice between fuel-saving processional racing or running completely over one another in massive crashes. He stated plainly that this represents the fundamental reality of what this car produces at superspeedways and described it as the path forward until meaningful changes arrive. He expressed a desire for significant changes to the car, but acknowledged with resignation that he does not genuinely expect anything substantive to materialize before the January off-season testing window opens. Alex Bowman managed a third-place finish and used his post-race platform to advocate for what he himself acknowledged would represent a dramatic and controversial change to the car's fundamental aerodynamic configuration. He specifically identified the dead third lane as the most critical problem requiring correction. The current car carries so much aerodynamic drag that any driver who pulls out of the established two-lane draft immediately loses speed at an alarming rate and gets shuffled helplessly toward the back of the field without any realistic ability to recover their position. He called for NASCAR to reduce the drag significantly while simultaneously removing some horsepower from the package. The counter-argument is equally compelling, however. Remove all the drag and these cars will exceed 220 miles per hour, creating an entirely different and potentially more serious safety conversation. Chase Elliott delivered what many observers immediately identified as the single most memorable and quotable line produced by the entire Talladega weekend. He described pulling out of the draft line to attempt a third-lane run as a death trap for anyone willing to try it. The two established draft lines generate so much collective push and momentum that any individual car attempting an independent move immediately gets swallowed and sent backward through the running order without recourse. Even Kyle Busch, who finally broke his prolonged rough stretch with a 10th-place finishing result that represented genuine progress for his struggling program, confirmed the same fundamental observations from his own experience throughout the race. He noted that multiple drivers throughout the afternoon attempted to establish a functioning third lane, and every single attempt failed. The cars always end up traveling backward rather than forward regardless of the driver behind the wheel attempting the move. So what is actually producing all of this? The answer traces back directly to the car itself. The next-gen car generates too much aerodynamic drag in its current configuration, which makes solo passing attempts nearly impossible. Drivers can only advance through the field by physically pushing the car directly ahead of them. But that pushing action creates instability in the corners and eventually turns someone sideways, triggering the chain reaction crashes that have defined superspeedway racing in the current era. The choice becomes fuel conservation and boredom or aggressive racing and destruction. No viable middle ground exists with the current package. The wheel situation adds another significant layer to the fuel-saving problem. Veteran competitor Ricky Stenhouse Jr. pointed out that the new single-lug nut wheel design enables pit stops to be completed in approximately 10 seconds. That extraordinary speed means teams can execute fuel conservation strategies to skip pit stops entirely and gain track position without any meaningful pit road penalty. Stenhouse argued that until NASCAR returns to the traditional 5-lug nut configuration, the fuel-saving incentive will never be adequately addressed or eliminated. NASCAR maintains that returning to 5-lug nuts is not safe with the current aluminum wheel design, creating a genuine engineering dilemma without an obvious solution available. The afternoon was not without its genuinely redemptive and emotionally powerful moment, however. Carson Hocevar claimed his first career Cup Series victory in his 91st career start. It also represented only the second win in the entire history of Spire Motorsports as an organization. His victory celebration captured everything that makes NASCAR genuinely special when the sport is operating at its best. He sat on the door of his car, simultaneously hanging out the window, waving enthusiastically to the roaring crowd and executing a burnout with the rear tires. The grandstands absolutely erupted in response. New CEO Steve O'Donnell found Hocevar immediately after the race and personally communicated his approval of the celebration without reservation. But that celebration moment perfectly illustrates the fundamental tension at the heart of everything happening in NASCAR right now. Hocevar's victory and the genuine joy it produced represents exactly the kind of authentic and memorable moment the sport needs to generate consistently to grow and thrive. The problem is, the current car only reliably produces one of those moments per race weekend. Everything surrounding it consists of fuel conservation parades and catastrophic multi-car crashes that eliminate half the field before the race reaches its natural conclusion. Subscribe us to reach first 1,000 subscribers.